Every year, Thanksgiving looked the same. Same house. Same overcooked turkey smell drifting through the hallway. The same football game murmuring from the living room TV. Same laughter that somehow always managed to happen around me. Never with me. And the same seat. The folding chair at the far end of the table. Not technically outside the family circle, but never really inside it either. I used to tell myself it didn't matter. Families had habits, patterns. Someone always ended up at the edge. It wasn't personal. Except it always seemed to be me. If you looked at old photos, you'd see it. Mom and dad in the center, my sister beside them with her perfect posture and even more perfect life. Her kids orbiting like happy little moons, and then me smiling politely, hands folded, already halfway erased. I wasn't the troublemaker growing up. I wasn't the golden child either. I was the space between conversations. The kid teachers described as independent, which, I later realized, was adult code for he doesn't ask for help because he knows nobody's coming. If my sister needed something, the house mobilized like an emergency response team. If I needed something, I figured it out. At first it felt like freedom. Later, it felt like proof. By the time I turned 18, I had mastered invisibility so well it almost became a talent. You learn useful things when people underestimate you. You learn how money works, how silence works, how rooms change depending on who people think you are. Mostly, you learn that love in some families isn't loud, it's assumed, and assumptions can starve you. I left home quietly, no dramatic fight, no tearful goodbye. Mom hugged me while thinking about something else. Dad told me to keep my head down and work hard. My sister asked if I could help her move apartments the following weekend. I said sure. I always said sure. Life outside the house was terrifying for about 6 months. Then it became electric. For the first time, every success was mine. Every failure to no comparisons, no expectations, just me and the terrifying beautiful fact that nobody was coming to save me. So I worked brutal hours, took risks I didn't tell anyone about, slept on couches, then in tiny apartments, then somewhere a little better. I stopped going home for most holidays, said work was busy, nobody argued. That hurt more than if they had. But Thanksgiving had gravity. No matter how far I drifted, it pulled me back. Maybe I kept hoping one year would be different. Maybe I wanted someone to notice the changes in me. Maybe I just wanted a seat that didn't fold. Whatever the reason, I always showed up, and every year, it was the same double quotes. "Hey, you made it," Mom would say. Surprised in a way that suggested she half expected. WOULDN single quotes to Dad would nod like attendance had been taken. My sister would be mid-story about her promotion, her vacation, her kids, her something. I'd put down the pie I brought. Someone would say, "You didn't have to do that." They never meant it. Dinner conversations moved like trains. Fast, loud, directed. I kept waiting for one to stop for me. It never did. If I tried to talk about work, eyes glazed over. If I mentioned travel, someone interrupted. If I laughed too loudly, it felt like I'd broken a rule no one had explained. So eventually, I learned my part. Ask questions, pass the potatoes, smile on cue, disappear politely. What they didn't know was that my quiet had changed. It wasn't insecurity anymore. It was observation. I noticed who they praised, what they valued, which achievements counted and which floated away like steam from the mashed potatoes. Stability mattered. Appearances mattered. Predictability mattered. I was none of those things. By my early 30s, my life had become big. Complicated. Successful in ways that would have sounded unreal at that table, but I never knew how to bring it up. How do you tell people who barely ask about your week that your entire world has transformed? So I didn't. And they didn't ask. The strangest part, they thought we were close. Mom would tell neighbors, "Oh, my kids are very tight." Dad bragged that we all came home for holidays. My sister posted photos captioned "grateful for family," and I'd stare at those pictures wondering how you could be both present and missing at the same time. Then came that year. The year everything finally cracked open. I didn't know it. Walking in, I was just tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of being the extra chair. Tired of pretending distance was normal. I had spent the past decade building a life so large that silence around it had started to feel absurd. Not because I needed praise, but because pretending it didn't exist was exhausting. Mom hugged me at the door. Dad was already talking about interest rates with my brother in law. My sister waved from the kitchen, flower on her cheek, glowing in the way people glow when they are certain of their place in the world, and my chair waited for me at the edge. Dinner unfolded exactly like always. Stories, interruptions, laughter. At some point, my nephew asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, my sister smiled and said, "Oh, he's always doing some mysterious business thing." Everyone chuckled. That conversation moved on, and something in me stilled. Not anger, not even sadness, just clarity. If I didn't speak now, I never would. So I decided, very calmly, that before the night ended, I was going to stop being invisible. Not dramatically, not cruelly. Just honestly, they were going to meet me. For real. I didn't know that one simple Casual sentence later that evening would hit the table like thunder. I didn't know forks would freeze mid-air. I didn't know the room would finally look at me, but it would, and once they saw me, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. I didn't plan it like a speech. There was no dramatic build-up in my head. No rehearsed lines. No fantasy of revenge where everyone suddenly realized they had misjudged me. I was too tired for fantasies. What I wanted, more than anything, was to stop editing myself down into something easy for them to ignore. Dinner carried on the way it always did, loud in the middle, blurry at the edges. My brother-in-law was explaining something about mortgage rates. Dad was nodding with intense interest, chiming in with numbers he'd half heard from the news. My sister was cutting food for the kids while still somehow holding court in 3 conversations at once. Mom kept getting up and sitting down, orbiting the table like anxiety with an apron. I watched them. Not bitter, just awake. I realized that invisibility had become a collaboration. They overlooked me, I allowed it, and tonight, for the first time, I didn't want to. It happened because my nephew asked again. Kids are like that. They don't recognize social escape routes. He leaned toward me, elbows on the table. Uncle, what do you actually do? I opened my mouth. I felt my sister inhale beside him, that gentle pre-interruption breath she always took, ready to summarize me into something small and harmless. But this time I kept talking. I invest, I said. Simple. Neutral, a few polite nods. Dad smiled in that distant way people smile when they've decided a topic is already over. But my nephew wasn't done, like in companies. Yeah, I said. How many? I almost laughed. How do you answer that at a table where they still think you rent the cheapest apartment in any city you mention? I shrugged a little. Enough, my sister chuckled. See, mysterious. There it was again. The family brand of me. Lovable, vague, decorative. Something warm moved through my chest, not rage, not quite, more like the moment before you finally stand up after sitting to long pins and needles, blood returning. Dad turned back to my brother-in-law conversation, drifting. Window closing. If I let it. And suddenly I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand attention. I took a sip of water, set the glass down carefully, and spoke into the natural law between topics. Calm. Almost casual. I added, my net worth crossed about 170 million this quarter, so I guess it's going okay. If you've never felt a room lose oxygen, it's hard to explain. Sound doesn't stop, it collapses. Forks hovered. My mum froze halfway into sitting. My brother-in-law blinked like he'd misheard a foreign language. And for the first time in my adult life, every single pair of eyes at that table turned toward me at the exact same time, not past me, at me. I remember thinking, oh, so this is what it takes. Dad gave a short laugh. It came out sharp, confused. Wait, he said. What? I kept my voice gentle. Yeah, markets have been good. A couple exits closed earlier than we expected. Silence again. My sister studied my face like she was searching for the punchline. Mum finally lowered herself into her chair. You're joking, she whispered. I shook my head. No, and I didn't elaborate because I had spent my whole life explaining myself to people who weren't listening. If they wanted to know, they could ask. They asked all at once. What do you mean? How? Since when? Why didn't you tell us? What company? Are you serious? Is that real money? The questions tangled together, frantic, bumping into each other like they were trying to escape the table. And beneath them all was the real one. How did we not know this about you? I felt strangely steady. I didn't hide it, I said. I just never really got the chance to talk. No accusation, no heat, just truth. And somehow that made it heavier. My dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossing, defensive reflex. You're saying you're worth, what, more than $100 million? 170. My brother-in-law muttered automatically, still in numbers mode. Dad ignored him. I nodded. For now, I said. Markets move. Mom pressed her hand to her chest. Oh my God, not greedy, just overwhelmed, like she was replaying every Thanksgiving in reverse. Searching for signs she should have seen. My sister spoke more quietly than I'd ever heard. Why didn't you ever say anything? I met her eyes. I wanted to be careful here because this was the doorway. We could walk through it together or slam it forever. I tried, I said a few times, but everyone was usually busy. Nobody argued. That was the loudest part. I watched realization move across their faces in slow, painful waves. Not just that I had money, but that I had a life. A massive, complicated, a successful life. And they had never truly asked about it. My nephew whispered, whoa, honestly. Same. Dad rubbed his jaw. What kind of investing? He asked, like if he could categorize it. He could shrink it. Tech, I said. Energy, infrastructure, some private placements. Every word made the table quieter. My brother-in-law looked like he wanted to ask something competitive, but there was nowhere to stand. Mom finally said the thing that cracked my heart open. I thought you were struggling, she admitted. I smiled a little. I said. For a long time, and you didn't see that either. I didn't say the second part. I didn't need to. The air had changed, not hostile, but rearranged. Like furniture being moved to make space for something that had always been there but never acknowledged me. For the next hour, they asked about everything. Where I lived, what my days looked like, how long it had been like. This. They listened the way people listen when history is rewriting itself in real time. I answered, not to impress them, but because I finally could. At some point I realized my plate was still half full. I hadn't eaten for once. I was the conversation, and nobody interrupted. It should have felt victorious. It didn't. It felt sad, because the price of being seen was proof that I had once been invisible when dinner ended. Nobody rushed away. Dad asked if we could talk later. My sister kept looking at me with this fragile mixture of pride and guilt. Mom squeezed my hand every time she passed behind my chair, like she was checking I was real. I had wanted acknowledgement for so long. Now that it was here, it felt enormous. Heavy. Alive. And somewhere deep down, I knew something else too. Tonight wasn't the ending. It was the beginning, because once a family finally sees you, they have to decide what to do with what they missed after a bomb goes off. People think the loud part is the explosion. It isn't. It's the ringing afterward, the strange, weightless quiet where everyone is still standing, but nothing is where it used to be. That was the house after dinner. Plates stacked in uneven towers, dishwasher open but unloaded, the football game still playing to nobody. And my family, moving slower than I had ever seen them move, like gravity had increased. Like every step required new information about who I was. I helped Mom in the kitchen, not because I had to, because it was something normal to hold on to. She handed me a towel, then another, then forgot what she was doing halfway through, drying a glass. Twice she opened her mouth, twice she stopped. Finally she said it. I feel like I missed your whole life. No theatrics. Just grief. I leaned back against the counter. You didn't miss it, I said gently. You just didn't ask many questions. Her face folded in on itself. That's worse, she whispered. I wanted to rescue her from that feeling. Reflex. I had been emotionally managing this family since I was 10, but I stopped myself because protecting them from the truth was how we got here. So instead I said softly, yeah, it kind of is. She nodded. Accepted it, and somehow that hurt in a cleaner way. In the living room, Dad was pretending to watch TV. The universal signal of a man trying to reorganize his identity without witnesses. My brother-in-law sat on the arm of the couch, hands clasped, staring at the carpet like it might explain finance, time travel, and emotional neglect if he looked hard enough. My sister hovered near the doorway, waiting for courage. I think. Mom reached for my wrist. Your father wants to talk, she said. I smiled a little. I figured. Dad muted the television when I walked in. Not off. Muted. Like he might need noise again later in case things got too real. Sit, he said. I did. For a second, we just existed there. Father and son, same as always, except not at all. I don't understand how I didn't know, he began. There was frustration in it, but most of it was aimed inward. I shrugged slightly. You were busy. I said. It wasn't sarcasm. He really was. Work bills, keeping the house running, supporting my sister's constant emergencies. I had made myself low-maintenance. It was supposed to help. You never told me you were building something like that, he said. I looked at him carefully. I didn't think you wanted details, I answered. You always seemed done with the conversation before it started. He absorbed that, didn't fight it, which was new, I thought. He said slowly, if something big was happening, you'd make sure we knew. I almost smiled, because that was the misunderstanding of my entire childhood. I had always believed, if they wanted to know, they would ask. I kept waiting for an opening. I told him there just never was one. My sister made a small sound from the doorway, not a cry, more like something breaking. Quietly. Dad rubbed his hands together. I brag about you, he said suddenly. 2 people at work. I say you're smart, independent. I nodded. I know, but I didn't know what you actually did, he finished. There it was, the hollow center of it. We sat with that. Years condensed into a shared understanding neither of us had language for back then. Finally he asked, were you ever going to tell us? I thought about that. About the versions of me that had come home for holidays, carrying whole universes behind polite smiles. I think, I said carefully, I was waiting to see if anyone noticed I had something to tell. My sister left the doorway, then crossed the room. Sat beside me. Not elegant, not rehearsed. Just necessary. I'm sorry, she said. Immediate. Raw. Talked over you my entire life. I looked at her. She was right, but hearing her say it loosened something in my chest I didn't know was still tight. You had a lot going on, I said. So did you, she replied, and for once, she didn't sound defensive. She sounded aware. We talked for a long time about old Thanksgivings, about moments I remembered that they died in single quotes. About how easy it is for families to freeze roles in place and never update them. I had been the quiet one, so they stopped listening and I became quieter. Because why compete with a label everyone preferred? At some point my brother-in-law spoke. I thought you just liked staying out of it, he admitted. I laughed. Not unkindly, no one likes staying out of their own family. Mom sat on the other side of me, took my hand, held it like she was reacquainting herself with something fragile she'd once misplaced. "I'm proud of you," she said again. "But more than that, I'm ashamed it took a dollar amount for us to slow down." I appreciated the honesty, because pretending this was purely heartwarming would have been another way of avoiding responsibility. Money had translated me, and we all knew it, but something else had happened too. They were listening now, really listening. Not because I was rich, but because they had finally realized I had always been here. The clock pushed past midnight. Nobody mentioned going home. We were rebuilding a map, and everyone was afraid to lose progress. Eventually, Dad stood, walked toward the hallway, then stopped, turned back. "I want to do better." He said it wasn't dramatic, it was a promise made by a man who knew he couldn't redo the past but was terrified of wasting the future. I believed him when I finally left that night. My sister hugged me longer than usual. Mom kissed my cheek. Dad squeezed my shoulder. Small gestures, but intentional. Driving away, I expected triumph, vindication, something cinematic. What I felt instead was grief for all the versions of me who had sat at that table before tonight, hoping for exactly this. But under the grief, there was relief, because they had seen me, finally, and now they had to decide how to love someone real in the mirror. The house looked smaller, or maybe I had finally stopped shrinking. Promises sound beautiful at midnight. They glow in the soft light of regret and honesty, wrapped in the comfort of finally having said the thing you should have said years ago. But morning is different. Morning asks, "Okay, now what?" I woke up the next day half expecting the previous night to feel exaggerated in memory, like maybe we'd all been emotional, dramatic, caught up in surprise. Maybe daylight would shrink it back down. It didn't. My phone had 3 texts from Mum, 1 from Dad, 2 from my sister, all sent after I got home, all variations of the same message. "Thank you for telling us. We love you. We're sorry." I read them twice, not because I doubted them, because I was trying to understand how unfamiliar it felt to be pursued instead of accommodated. Growing up, I had been the easy one, the one who adapted, the one who didn't require follow-up. If I left, I left. If I succeeded, great. If I struggled, I'd handle it. The family system had quietly relied on that. Now they were waking up to the fact that easy had actually meant unattended. Mom called before noon. She never called before noon. "Unless someone was in the hospital," I answered. On the second ring. "Hi, honey," she said, voice cautious, like I might disappear if she moved too fast. "Hi, Mom." Pause. "I keep thinking about what you said," she admitted. "About waiting for someone to notice. You had something to tell." I leaned back on my couch. "Yeah, I don't ever want you to feel like that again." It was a beautiful sentence, terrifying, too, because it meant change. And change inside a family is like renovating a house while everyone is still living in it. Dust everywhere. Nothing where it used to be. "What would that look like?" she asked, and I almost laughed because she was asking me to write instructions for being loved, but I understood what she meant. She wanted a place to start. "Ask," I said gently, "about my work, my life, what I'm excited about, what's hard." She inhaled like it was obvious and impossible at the same time. "Okay," she said. "I can do that." Dad's message was shorter. "Proud of you. Want to understand more. Lunch soon." That was his language. Efficient, practical, vulnerable only by implication. I texted back, "Yes." My sister didn't text. She FaceTimed. She looked wrecked. Mascara gone, hair in a knot, coffee the size of apology in her hand. I replayed my entire personality last night. She said by way of greeting. I smiled. "How'd it go?" "Bad," she replied instantly. She told me she'd started remembering specific moments. Times she'd cut me off, corrected me, assumed she knew what I was going to say. "I thought we had roles," she said. "I didn't realize I built mine on top of yours." That one landed because it was true. She had shined, and I had stepped back to make room. Not because she asked, because someone had to. "I don't blame you." I told her. "I know," she said. "That might be worse." For the next week they tried, and it was awkward. Beautiful. But awkward. Dad took me to lunch at a place he loved, where the waiters knew him, and the booths were too small. He brought a notebook, a literal notebook. I wrote things down. "I want to ask," he said. Almost embarrassed, I felt something warm bloom in my throat. "Shoot, old man, shoot." So he did. "How did you start? What was the first deal? When were you scared? Did anyone help you? Why didn't you quit?" No one had ever asked me for my origin story before. I gave it to him. All of it. And he listened like he was trying to memorize me. Mom started calling every few days, not hovering, just present. "What's your week look like? Are you sleeping enough? Is something stressing you right now?" I didn't always have dramatic answers, but that wasn't the point. She was practicing. Visibility. My sister tried the hardest and therefore messed up the most, which I respected. She would catch herself mid-interrupt and physically clap a hand over her mouth. "Sorry, keep going." We'd both laugh. It became our thing. But here's what nobody tells you. about finally being seen. It's exhausting because suddenly you exist in high definition. Your life is interesting, your thoughts are requested, your time is valuable. After decades of being wallpaper, becoming a person is a lot of work. Some nights I missed disappearing. It had been lonely, but it had been simple. Still, every attempt they made mattered. Not because they were perfect, because they were deliberate. About 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, Mom invited me over for dinner. Just me. That had never happened in my adult life. When I arrived, she had written questions on recipe cards. She shuffled them like a game. I don't want to freeze up, she confessed. I hugged her. You're doing great, I said. And I meant it. Halfway through dessert, she asked, what's something hard you went through that we don't know about? I hesitated, then told her about the year I almost lost everything. I ate cereal for weeks. How scared I'd been, how badly I had wanted to call home, but didn't want to sound like a failure. She cried, not loudly, but completely. I would have come, she said. I know, I answered. And for the first time, I believed it. Change wasn't instant. We still slipped into old rhythms sometimes, but now we noticed, and noticing is the beginning of repair. One evening my sister texted me, I think we loved you. I just don't think we saw you. I stared at that for a long time, then replied, seeing me now counts. Because it did. They couldn't redo childhood. They couldn't retroactively hand me attention at 22, but they could show up at 30-5. They could ask that, could listen. They could learn the shape of the man I had become without them. And slowly, unbelievably, they did. By Christmas, something felt different. Not fixed, but alive, like a muscle we had never used was finally remembering how to move, and under all of it was a quiet understanding none of us said out loud yet. Seeing me was step one. Step two would be harder because once you truly recognize someone's life, you have to figure out where you fit inside it. By Christmas, my family had become attentive in a way that was almost tender. They asked questions. They listened without interrupting. They corrected themselves when old habits slipped out. If part 3 had been about apology, and part 4 about effort, then this new stretch of time was about something far more complicated. Placement, because now that they could finally see me, they were trying to figure out where I belonged inside the picture. And the truth was, my life had grown in directions that didn't automatically include them. The first hint came from my sister. We were at a cafe, sitting across from each other with matching coffees going cold between us. She'd invited me out specifically, which still felt new enough to notice every time. I want to understand your world, she said. I believed her. How? I asked. She hesitated, then took the leap. Can I come with you sometime? On a work trip or something. I want to see what you actually do. There it was. Access. Not malicious, not entitled. But big. I leaned back, choosing my words carefully, because this was the moment that would teach us how the future worked. I love that you're curious, I told her, and I want to share parts of it with you. Her shoulders relaxed, but I continued. Some of it is also complicated, confidential, high pressure, not exactly visitor-friendly. She nodded slowly, absorbing it, not retreating. So maybe not a trip, she said. But could you show me, like, explain DLs, how you decide things? I smiled. That I can do, and just like that, we had drawn a line without hurting each other. She got connection. I kept ownership. Conversation complete. The moment came differently. He invited me over to look at something, which in father language meant he had been thinking too hard and needed to put the thoughts somewhere. We sat at the dining room table. Papers everywhere. Was wondering, he began, if maybe you'd want to handle more of the family planning stuff. Investments, long term. It was careful, respectful, but I could hear the subtext. You're good at this. You're successful. Maybe you should take over. I folded my hands. I'm happy to advise, I said. I'm not looking to control everything. He watched me closely. Why not? He asked. Good question, because control looks like importance from the outside, but it feels like weight from the inside. Because I want to be your son, I told him, not the department you outsourced responsibility to. He sat back, thought about it, then nodded. That's fair, he said, and I could see relief in him too, because leadership is heavy, even when you offer it. Conversation complete. Asterisk. Mom's version was softer, but just as significant. She had started calling regularly, and one evening she asked, do you think you'll ever move closer to home? It was hopeful, careful, and full of longing. She was trying not to make my burden. I don't know. I said honestly, my work and my friends are built where I am. She nodded, already bracing. But, I added, I want to visit more, and I want you to visit me too. See my actual life. Her expression shifted. From lost to invitation. I'd like that, she said. And she meant it. Conversation complete. These moments repeated in different shapes for weeks, each one a small negotiation, between love and autonomy, between closeness and absorption. They were learning not to pull me back into the version of me they remembered. They were trying to meet the person standing in front of them. And I was learning something too. I'd always believed that being invisible protected my independence. But visibility, when handled right, didn't erase me, it connected me. One night my sister said something that proved we were getting somewhere real. We were on the phone, talking about scheduling another dinner, and she paused. I keep worrying I'm going to ask for too much, she admitted. I appreciated that more than she knew. If you ever do, I told her, I'll say so. She laughed lightly. And you won't disappear instead? No, I said. I'm done disappearing. Silence. Then warmth. Okay, she replied. I can work with that. Conversation complete. The biggest shift, though, happened quietly. They started telling me things. About their worries, their finances, their fears about aging. Not because they needed my money, because they trusted my steadiness. And trust is heavier than admiration. One evening Dad said, I used to think being a good father meant having answers. He looked at me across the table. Now I think it means being willing to hear them. I met his eyes. You're doing that, I said. He nodded once. That was enough. Conversation complete. We were building something. Functional, not perfect, but honest. Boundaries spoken out loud. Affection expressed deliberately. Interest without ownership that it felt adult, earned. And maybe the most important part, no one was pretending the past hadn't happened. We were just refusing to live in it. I began to understand that reconciliation isn't a grand gesture. It's maintenance. Daily, sometimes awkward maintenance. Choosing again and again to see each other clearly. By the end of winter, my family no longer treated me like a surprise. I was part of the structure, now accounted for. Consulted. Respected. But respect brings something new with it. Expectation. And soon, a moment was coming where they would wonder whether love meant access to more than my time and advice. They wouldn't mean harm, but the question would still land like pressure, and I would have to answer it without becoming invisible again. Money had detonated the silence at Thanksgiving. After that, we had spent months learning how to talk to each other like real people instead of assigned roles. We had apologized. We had practiced listening. We had drawn boundaries gently and kept them intact. It felt healthy, earned, fragile, in the way new muscles are fragile, stronger every day, but aware of how easily you could pull something if you moved too fast. And then, inevitably, we moved too fast. It started small. It always does. My sister and I were assembling furniture in her living room. The instructions spread across the floor like an argument written in Swedish. Her kids were in the other room. My brother-in-law on a grocery run that was comfortable, domestic, normal. We had become good at normal. She handed me a screwdriver, so she said, casual in the way people are when they are absolutely not casual. Can I ask you something kind of weird? I smiled. You can ask. Permission mattered now. She twisted a bolt, not looking at me. Do you ever think about what your money could do for the family? There it was. Not greedy. Not sharp. Just huge, floating between us like something that had been waiting for courage. I took my time, because the answer would set precedent, and precedent has a long memory. I think about it, I said. Of course I do. She nodded, still focused on the bolt. Figured, I continued. But I also think about what money can do to a family. That made her look up, not defensive. Just listening. I don't ever want us to become a group where love comes with an invoice, I said. Her face changed immediately, softened because she had been afraid of that too. I don't want that either, she said quickly. God, no. We sat with it. The honesty of mutual fear. I'm not asking for anything, she clarified. Sometimes I imagine easier versions of our lives, and I know you exist in a world where easier is possible. That sentence hurt because it was true, and because I loved her. I set the screwdriver down. Easier isn't always better, I said gently, but support can be situated. I want to help when help makes sense. I continued. Emergencies, education, opportunities, things that build independence, not replace it. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. That sounds fair, she whispered. Conversation complete. Dad's moment came a week later. We were walking through a hardware store, which for him was church. He stopped in front of a display of generators, hands in his pockets. You know, he began, staring at the price tag instead of me. I keep catching myself almost thinking you could just fix things. I let him finish. The roof, the retirement numbers, stuff like that. I waited. Because what he did next mattered more than the thought itself. He exhaled. And then I tell myself that's not your job. I looked at him. You're right, I said. He nodded. But it's hard not to imagine relief, he admitted. I put a hand on his shoulder. Imagining is human, I told him. Expecting is where it gets dangerous. He gave a short laugh. Yeah, he said. I don't want to get dangerous. Conversation complete. Mom surprised me. She didn't ask for anything. She asked about fairness. We were cooking together, moving around each other in an easy rhythm we had built from repetition. Do you ever worry, she said, stirring a pot, that helping one person would hurt someone else? All mothers are diplomats at heart. All the time. I admitted. That's why I move slowly. She nodded. Wise. Then she turned to me. I don't want you buying your way into belonging, she said. You already belong. I swallowed because she was giving me something priceless. Freedom. Conversation complete. But the biggest conversation was the one we didn't expect. My nephew, he sat beside me during a movie night, legs tucked under him, brain moving at kid speed. Are we rich? He asked. I smiled. What do you think? He considered it. I think you are. He concluded. Fair. What does that mean for us? He asked. Honest. Clean. Terrifying. Double quotes. It means I love you, I said. And when you grow up, if there's something you want to build, I'll help you learn how. He accepted that instantly. Because kids understand scaffolding better than adults. Conversation complete. After that, something settled, not certainty, but direction. We had looked at the giant, glowing maybe in the room. Maybe he'll pay for things. Maybe life could be different. Maybe we deserve it. Maybe we don't. And instead of pretending it wasn't there, we had given it shape. Support without control. Help without ownership. Love without transaction. It sounded simple. It was not, but it was possible. Driving home that night, I realized something important. They hadn't tried to grab me. They had tried to understand how not to, and because of that, I wanted, more than ever, to give. But giving carefully requires strength. Because very soon, something would happen that would test whether we meant all these beautiful rules, a real need, a real cost. And when that moment arrived, I would find out if our new family could survive the oldest pressure in the world. Money. The call came on a Tuesday. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just my phone buzzing while I stood in the cereal aisle comparing to brands. I didn't even like Dad's name on the screen. I smiled when I answered. Hey, I said. His voice told me immediately this wasn't a social call. Hey kid, he replied, trying for normal and landing somewhere near exhausted. You got a minute? Yeah. What's going on? There was a pause, paper shifting, Mom murmuring somewhere in the background. Then he said it. The furnace went. Of all the disasters in the world, it was so ordinary it almost felt insulting. Not a hospital, not a lawsuit, not some life-shattering catastrophe, just the steady, adult nightmare of a machine deciding it had reached retirement before you had. How bad? I asked. Bad enough, he said. Guy says it's done. Cracked heat exchanger. Translation. Replace it. Translation. Money. I closed my eyes for a second. This was it. The test. Part 6 had whispered about, not abstract, not philosophical. A bill with numbers on it. You safe tonight? I asked. Yeah, we've got space heaters. It's just, we should handle it quick. We, not you, I noticed. How much? Another pause. About $11,000. I spent more than that last month without blinking, and suddenly it weighed as much as a planet. Dad rushed to fill the silence. I'm not calling to ask you to pay for it, he said quickly. I needed to say it out loud to someone. I believed him. That's what made it harder. We talked logistics, warranties, install dates, how Mom was already wearing 3 sweaters and pretending she wasn't worried. Normal conversation, but underneath it, something else breathed. Choice. After we hung up, I stood in that cereal aisle way longer than necessary, because there are 2 kinds of help. The kind you offer, and the kind people accept. And they are not always the same thing. I drove to their house, didn't call ahead. If we were really rebuilding this family, I wanted to show up in real time. Mom opened the door, wrapped in a blanket like a burrito, trying to act casual. Oh good, she said, surprised but pleased. Reinforcements. Dad was at the kitchen table with the quote in front of him. He looked embarrassed. Not because I knew, because he couldn't protect me from knowing. I sat down. We reviewed it together like a committee. Efficiency ratings, financing options, the slow bleed of responsibility. Finally, I asked the question we were all orbiting. What's the plan? Dad leaned back. We'll put some on the card, he said. Shift some savings around. Might push retirement a little, but we'll manage. We. I nodded. What, he had made a plan that did not include me? That mattered. I took a breath. Okay, I said, and then I broke my own heart a little. I'd like to cover it. Silence. Mum froze. Mid-blanket adjustment. Dad blinked. You don't have to, he said immediately. I know that's a lot of money. I know. He studied me. What's the catch? There it was. History. Double quotes. No catch, I said. I'm not buying influence. I'm not buying holidays. I'm not buying votes in future arguments. A weak smile from Mom. I'm offering relief, I continued, because I can, and because watching you stress about this when I don't have to feels wrong. Dad rubbed his jaw. Pride versus practicality. Ancient fight. I don't want to become dependent, he said quietly. You won't? I replied. One furnace isn't a lifestyle. Mom laughed at that. Tension cracked. He looked at the numbers. Again. Then at me. Then at the version of our relationship that had been forming, fragile and brave. Okay, he said, but it's a gift, not an expectation. Deal. We shook on it like business partners who loved each other. Conversation complete. Installation happened 3 days later. Warm air filled the house like forgiveness. Mom cried. Dad pretended he had allergies, and I thought that was the end of it. Lesson learned. Rules successful. Family leveled up. I was wrong. Because generosity echoes, and echoes travel. 2 nights later my sister called. Dad told me. She said gently. I waited. I'm glad you helped, she continued. They were really scared. Me too, I said, and I meant it. She hesitated and I felt the ground shift. Not manipulation, not entitlement, just the terrifying gravity of comparison. I keep wondering, she admitted, what happens next time something breaks somewhere else. Fair. Honest. Human. I chose my words carefully. Next time, I said, we talk again from scratch, no assumptions. She exhaled. Okay, but it wasn't relief, it was awareness, because now the family knew. Two things could be true at once. I didn't owe them money, and I might help anyway. That space between those truths, that's where tension lives. That night I lay awake understanding something I hadn't before. Money doesn't just solve problems, it creates possibility, and possibility can feel like hope or like unfairness, depending on where you stand. I had wanted to be generous now. I had to learn how to be consistent because inconsistency breeds stories. And stories can rot love from the inside. But despite the fear, one fact remained. No one had demanded. No one had cornered. No one had tried to turn help into obligation. We were still choosing each other, even when it was complicated. And maybe that's what a healthy family looks like. Not perfect, not simple, but willing to stand in uncomfortable conversations without reaching for weapons. I stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, please let me do this right. Because more tests were coming. Bigger ones. Messier ones. The kind where everyone's definition of fair would be different. But for now, the house was warm. Dad could sleep. Mom could breathe. And I had given without disappearing. News travels fast in families, not through announcements, through tone, through the way someone says he helped. By the weekend, the story had evolved from I paid for the furnace into something softer and heavier. I was successful. I was generous. I was available. 3 ideas that, when placed together, start building expectations whether anyone means to or not. It started with Aunt Linda. She called Sunday afternoon. Cheerful in that overly bright way people use when they're nervous about their own intentions. I heard you saved the day, she said. I smiled even though she couldn't see it. I helped with a repair. I corrected gently, while she laughed. Still, your parents must feel so relieved. They are, I said. That's what matters. There was a pause. I felt it arrive like weather. I hate to even bring this up, she began, and I knew she absolutely did not hate bringing it up. She told me about her roof, how winter had been rough, how insurance was being difficult, how she was just trying to figure things out. She never actually asked, but the shape of the conversation leaned toward me the way plants lean toward sunlight. I listened. Boca, she wasn't evil. She was worried, and worry makes people reach. When she finished, I said the hardest sentence I'd practiced in my head all week. I'm really sorry you're dealing with that. I let it land, then I continued, but I can't become the solution to everyone's emergencies. Silence, not angry, just recalibrating. Oh, she said finally, of course, I understand. And I believed she did. Disappointed. But understanding. Those two things can live together. I hope it works out, I added. I really do. Thank you, she replied. Conversation over. No explosion, no drama, just a boundary, visible and real. When I hung up, I felt terrible and proud both at once, because here's the part nobody tells you about money and family. If you say yes to everyone, you lose yourself. If you say no to everyone, you lose them. So you spend your life walking a tightrope between love and self-protection, hoping the wind is gentle. That evening Dad called. Aunt Linda talked to your mom, he said. I groaned. Am I in trouble? He chuckled. No, she said you were kind. I blinked. Kind. She said you listened, he continued, and you were honest. Relief moved through me so fast I had to sit down. You did good, Dad added. 3 words. Simple. Massive. Because for years, doing good had meant disappearing. This time it meant staying. I don't want you to feel like people are circling you, he went on. I don't, I said. And for the first time it was mostly true. They're learning, he said. So am I. We talked a little longer about normal things. Dinner, whether a TV show Mom liked, and then we said goodnight like families who expected to talk again tomorrow. Proper ending, no ghosts in it. After the call, I sat in the quiet of my living room and realized something important. The line wasn't just for them, it was for me. A reminder that love given freely is beautiful, but love demanded becomes rent, and I refused to start charging or paying it. By the time I went to bed, the guilt had softened. In its place was something steadier. Respect. Mutual, growing real. The family could now see the line. They might step near it sometimes, they might even wish it were further away, but they knew it existed, and they knew I would protect it, which meant finally I could stay in the picture without fading out. More conversations were coming, bigger ones, the kind that would decide what we truly were to each other. But they would happen in daylight, not whispers, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. The strange thing about change is that it rarely announces itself, it just arrives quietly and waits to see if anyone notices. Started noticing it in the way the phone rang, not with urgency, not with hesitation, just normal. My sister called on Wednesday night, no crisis, no hidden request. She just wanted to talk. We spoke about her week, about the kids, about how tired she was and how she sometimes felt like she was failing at everything even when she wasn't. He listened, not as the rich sibling, not as the solution, just as her brother. And when she finished, she said something that stayed with me, like talking to you again, such a small word, such a painful history inside it. I knew what she meant. There had been years where conversation with me felt complicated, weighted, full of comparisons nobody wanted to admit were happening, but tonight it was easy. Soft, really like it too, I told her. We sat in that truth for a moment, both aware that rebuilding is quieter than breaking before hanging up. She said, "Thank you, not for money, not for gifts, for showing up," and we ended the call the way people do when tomorrow is expected. Good night. A few days later, I went to my parents' house for dinner. No ceremony, no tension. Mom cooked too much like always. Dad complained about the news like always, but there was something different in the airspace room for me to exist without auditioning for worth. At one point, Mom reached across the table and touched my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not about the business, not about the money, about the money." Swallowed hard, because for most of my life I had chased achievements, hoping they would translate into love, and now love was being offered without a price tag. I squeezed her hand. "Thank you." Proper ending to a sentence. We had both waited years to finish. Later, Dad and I washed dishes together. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "I should have done better when you were younger," he said. There it was, the apology that had lived between us like furniture. Neither of us could move. "You did what you knew how to do," I replied. "It wasn't perfect, but we are here now." He nodded, and I saw relief in his shoulders. Forgiveness is sometimes permission to rest. We dried our hands. Conversation complete. No drama left. Hiding in the corners, driving in the corners. Driving home that night, I realized something. Nothing magical had happened. No grand speech, no cinematic reconciliation, just people choosing again and again to treat each other with care. And somehow that was bigger than fireworks. When I walked into my apartment, the quiet did not feel lonely, it felt earned. I thought about the invisible kid I used to be. The one who believed being loved meant becoming useful, becoming impressive, becoming anything but himself. I wished I could tell him something you do not have. To disappear, to belong. Maybe he would have believed me, maybe not, but I believed it. Now the money had not fixed my family, it had revealed them, and once the truth was visible, we had all decided to try, not perfectly, but honestly. I got ready for bed feeling something unfamiliar. Peace, not the fragile kind, the steady one, built from boundaries and presence and conversations that reached their endings. Tomorrow, there would be more life, more misunderstandings, more moments to practice this new way of being together, but the fear that I would lose them or myself had loosened its grip. We were no longer pretending. I was invisible, and I was no longer pretending. I did not want to be sent. I turned off the light, and for the first time in years I felt certain of something. We were going to be okay. Thanksgiving arrived without dread. That alone felt like a miracle. For years, the holiday had been a performance. I would show up carrying politeness like armor, prepared to be overlooked, prepared to shrink, prepared to survive. But this year I drove to the house with something new in my chest. I was not bracing. I was arriving. When I opened the door, the noise wrapped around me, pots moving, chairs scraping, someone laughing in the living room. Mom saw me first. "There he is," she said. Not, "Oh good, you made it," not, "You are late," not, "Can you help," just recognition. I stepped inside and felt it. Immediately, space had been made. Dad came from the hallway and pulled me into a hug, quick, solid, certain. "Glad you're here," he said, some words complete. He walked toward the dining room and stopped. There was a place set for me, not at the edge, not floating, not temporary, a real seat among everyone else's plate. Glass, my favorite role, already waiting like someone had remembered without being asked. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the picture rewrite old memories. I had always had a chair, but I had never felt invited to sit in it until now. My sister touched my arm. "You good?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "More than good." She smiled like she understood everything inside those 3 words. Dinner moved away. Family dinners, 2 stories overlapping, people talking to loud, gravy passed in dangerous arcs. But something had changed beneath the noise. Nobody was performing, nobody was measured. Wasn't the success story, I wasn't the disappointment, I wasn't the solution. I was just another person at the table, and somehow that was all I had ever wanted. At one point, Dad tapped his glass, not for a speech, just to gather attention. "I want to say something," he said. The room softened. He looked at me and then at everyone else. "I'm grateful we are learning how to be a family." Again, no eyes turned toward my bank account, no jokes about money, no sideways expectations, just agreement. "We are, Dad," I said. We were lit. A pie appeared, coffee filled the air, the evening loosened into comfort. Mom sat beside me on the couch. "You seem lighter," she said. "I thought about that." I told her. She nodded like a mother who had been waiting a long time to see her child set something heavy down when it was time to leave. No one rushed the goodbye. Hugs lasted. Plans for future dinners were mentioned. Nothing dramatic, nothing desperate, because none of us were afraid this would disappear overnight. We had built something steadier than that. Outside, the air was cold and honest. I stood on the porch for a moment before walking to my car. Through the window I could see them still moving around, still together, and I understood something with absolute clarity. They had not started loving me because of the money. They had learned how to love me because we finally talked about the places where love had failed before. The wealth had opened the door, but staying inside, that had been all of use. Got into the car and sat with the engine off. Years ago I had believed being seen would feel loud, victorious. Instead, it felt quiet, like coming home and finding the light already on. There invisible kid I used to be would not recognize this ending. He would expect another disappointment, another moment where he vanished in the middle of the room. But tonight I had a seat, a voice, a family trying in real time, and that was enough. Faye started the engine as I drove away. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Love, you get home safe." No extra meaning, no apology hiding inside it, no transaction, just love. He smiled at the road ahead for the first time. Thanksgiving was not a reminder of what I lacked, it was proof of what we had rebuilt. Did not need to be extraordinary to belong, I only needed to be present, and they were present with me. We were going to keep making mistakes, keep having hard conversations, keep practicing, but invisibility no longer lived at our table. My chair would be there next year and the year after that, not because of what I could give, but because I was family. I drove into the night carrying something steady and warm, not pride, not victory. Home asterisk. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, and what changed when you finally felt seen? If this story touched you, hit the like button so more people can find it. Subscribe for real stories about family pain, healing, and second chances. Share your experience in the comments because someone reading it might need hope tonight. And if you believe people can grow and relationships can be rebuilt, stay with this channel.